Folks, this is Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host. We have with us a fantastic guest, our first time guest, Dr. Joshua Mitchell. Dr. Joshua Mitchell is the author of the book American Awakening, Identity Politics, and Other Afflictions of Our Time. But I wanted to start talking to Dr. Mitchell about this article, How the Left Hijacked Civil Rights. And it basically sort of says, and I'm quoting here from a review, for centuries, Black Americans debated how to overcome racism, but they always emphasized human agency and individual responsibility. And Doctor, I was wondering if you can just sort of elaborate on that, what you meant by human agency and individual responsibility.
Well, if you look at the history of Black thought in America, there are three distinct strands, which Bob and I identified in the article. Either you exit America, either you stay and you voice your opposition to what's going on, or like Booker T. Washington, you're loyal to the American project. And while there were vast disagreements between those two strains of thought, which really continued up to recently, what they had in common, as Bob and I were saying, was the belief in human agency, that we have a problem and we're going to address it. And what's so very troubling about identity politics today is that it's assumption. You can argue about the extent to which racism was inscribed in the Constitution, but I've become more interested in the political import of whatever position you take. And my worry, and Bob's worry, was that continues to be that the political implication of the claim that America is systemically racist is your families can't help you, you can't help yourself, your religion can't help you, your local communities can't help you, only the state can help you. So I'm as much interested in the ongoing question of the extent to which race was part of the American founding. And I'm not one of these conservatives who says, well, America was this pure thing and then there was this accident called slavery. You know, I'm a Christian, and what that means is you look at every human situation and it's never quite right. It's pretty messed up always, and you're always trying to find redemption from a broken situation. So, but our bigger concern was that, you know, when you embrace this claim that America is systemically racist, the political import of that is we have to have more state spending because your local communities can't help you. And Martin Luther King was pretty clear. I mean, he changed, he went back and forth on all sorts of positions, but he was pretty clear, certainly early on, that the family mattered, that the churches mattered, and the state had to supplement those institutions, not become a substitute for it. And one way of reading what happened with the Great Society program is that the state increasingly became a substitute for those vibrant institutions that every community, Black or otherwise, needs in order to thrive. And so our concern about identity politics is it's really sending a message that all those mediating institutions that King believed in, and that thinkers as far back as Alexis de Tocqueville in the 1830s, who wrote Democracy in America, were saying were the most essential things to have. If you're going to save democracy from becoming a tyranny, and they did think that democracy was become a tyranny. All these people who saw democracy emerging in the modern world knew that it could become deeply tyrannical. Tocqueville's position, and Martin Luther King was completely in accord with it, is we build a world through our families and through our churches and through our local communities. And if there's residual racism, and here I'll add the King part, then the state has to step in, but as a supplement to those and not as a substitute for it. But when the state steps in, then you've basically given up on human agency. You've just declared that the churches can't help you, that your families can't help you, and you go into receivership. This is not healthy for any groups at all. And so our view is not the kind of star-eyed conservative view that we don't need to talk about race, we don't have to talk about slavery. Our view is that, yeah, it happened, yeah, it was horrible. And so now what we have to do is figure out how to fix practical problems. And the problem with identity politics, to come to the heart of the matter, is that it doesn't seem to be interested in solving problems. It does seem to be interested in wealth transfer. It does seem to be interested in growing the state, but it seems more interested in ascribing a status to people. Are you guilty or are you innocent? And this makes it very difficult to solve practical problems. And that's our grander opposition to it. If I may say one more thing about the Christian aspect of this, because I think you're not going to get identity politics right unless you understand Christianity. And this is why, again, King is important. You know, the great Christian insight that completely transformed the world was that purity and stain aren't a matter of scapegoating other groups. That's what pagans did. They sensed that there was stain amidst them, and so they would go decimate other people. It was group scapegoating. That's what the pagan world was all about. And the incredible insight that Christianity gives us is the problem of stain in man is so deep, original sin, that only a divine scapegoat, Christ, who takes away the sins of the world, is going to be able to solve us from this problem of stain. And identity politics is a strange reversion to this pagan insight that the way we solve our problems is by scapegoating. This, you can't build a country this way. We have real problems in this country, but we have to answer these things in face-to-face relations where sure we meet each other as having specific identities, and that's not the problem. The problem is that then becomes the end of the story. Oh, you have this identity, I can't talk with you. Identity is kind of a starting gambit. And then the great thing about building a world together is when you're actually working with people who you disagree with, you're distrustful of, if you actually have to work with them to solve problems, you come away thinking, well, I guess I was wrong about that person. But identity politics doesn't want to build a world that way. It wants to separate peoples into groups. It wants an easy accounting system by which we can look at other people and say, you're this, I'm that. And it basically does violence to the fundamental fact that when we encounter another person, really encounter them and have to work with them, our prejudices are always exceeded by what we see in them, by which I mean, not exceeded, they're diffused. We realize, wow, that's not what I thought that person was going to be. And that's the kind of world I want to build and the kind of world Bob wants to build. So we're really pushing back against identity politics.
Now, brother, you just said a lot. Giving you 15 minutes is a real disservice, but I'm assuming that in your book, American Awakening, Identity Politics and Other Afflictions of Our Time, you go into that a little bit more, what you just said. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah,
right.
A lot.
And of course, we can get that book at Amazon.com, but also we could go to Encounter Books. Just put that into our search engine and put in Encounter Books, and then we can buy that from their website, that book. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. Brother, let me ask you this. You know, as I was listening to you rather intently, this is very, very close to my heart because my father, my own studies, and I was reading that, and as I was reading that article, How the Left Hijacked Civil Rights, I was saying, man, these guys have a pretty solid, wide understanding of Black political thought. Because I think even in the article you mentioned, the Republic of New Africa, I said, man, right then and there, these guys have done some serious study and research. But let me ask you this: reparations. How does that? Isn't and I'm just sort of struggling here. Isn't that representative of identity politics?
Well, so reparations is a really tough issue because, you know, so Bob and I are conservative. Bob's Black, I'm white. We kind of see eye to eye on this. You know, it's a mistake for conservatives to say we live in a colorblind society and everything's just fine. That's a mistake. And I'm enough of a kind of covenantal Christian thinker to think that America is finally going to be judged by God and by world history by the extent to which we deal seriously with this wound. My concern about reparations, there are a couple things I would say, and I haven't said any of this and haven't written about it, so this is a kind of first point I would make would be this. You know, psychologically speaking, when there's a wound and you want to heal the wound, you have to go back to the site of the wound. So if you're in therapy, you have to go back and in a way relive that wound. And so the question would be, if you want to project that onto the question of race and American slavery, you know, what was the nature of the wound? And the wound happened on the land. I live out here on the eastern shore of Maryland, not far from where Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass grew up.
Yes.
And you still feel the wound. You feel it in the land. And so the first thing I would say, and nobody is talking about this, is if we're going to be serious about something called reparations and healing the wound, maybe it's not a money issue, maybe it's a land issue.
Hmm.
Maybe, and I'm now just thinking out loud.
Yes.
There's a lot of public land in America. And so I wonder if, in light of the fact, not only did the wound happen there, but a greater problem in America as a whole, not just Black, it's everywhere. Is it slowly but surely, small property holdings are disappearing. And you can't have a vibrant democracy unless citizens have small property holdings that are protected by the rule of law. And in the Great Depression, people had gardens. And so, yeah, they didn't starve to death because they had gardens. Well, what do we do now in the COVID-19 pandemic when everybody depends upon, buying things at the grocery store? So the property question is a big question in general in America. And I think, if you're going to think seriously about reparations, if you're going to do anything, I would think it would be land rather than money. That's the first thing I would say. But here's the other thing. This is what I'm more haunted by. Let's say you come up with a figure. Pick a number. I don't care what it is. Pick a number. And then the American government, or who, and this is the great question, who writes the check? But let's assume the check is written. Okay, does that mean it's over? Does that mean now the balance is now even? And I don't think it's that kind of a wound. I think it's a deeper kind of wound. And I talk in the book about two economies. There's the visible economy of money, and then there's what I call the invisible economy of transgression and innocence. And this is what Christianity talks about. And that's the problem with being human, is that we're working on two economies at once. And the deeper economy is this economy of transgression and innocence. It's the spiritual economy. And the idea that you can address the deeper wound by having a kind of payment system on the lesser economy, the visible economy of money, it's just not clear to me that answers it either. So, I'm haunted by this, but I think, where I come down on this now is collective debt isn't going to do this, but collective responsibility is. So if there's wounds that haven't been healed, we need, every single American needs to ask the question, well, so what do we do? And this is why I like working with Bob. Bob runs something called the Woodson Center, which I'd recommend, if you don't know it now, and your readers or your audience doesn't know it, I mean, go look at the Woodson Center. Bob, I think, was maybe the head of the Urban League in the 1970s and came out of the Civil Rights Movement. He's 83.
Yes.
And he finally walked away from it and said, a program that began as a great idea, the Great Society program, now requires a permanent underclass of Blacks who can't take care of themselves, so that you can have a permanent class of providers to take care of them. And this can't be healthy, that you have this kind of division in America. And so Bob set up the Woodson Center, and his view is, here's how you do it. You find the people in the communities that are broken who actually have deep knowledge of their communities, and by the grace of God have been through their own personal hell, whether it's drug addiction or the death of their children or whatever, and they've utterly turned their lives around. And they become the magnets of these communities that are in bad shape. And Bob finds them. And the model he uses is from the Old Testament. It's Joseph, who was a slave, and Pharaoh discovers that Joseph is competent. And so he gives Joseph immense power to help his people. And that's Bob's model. It's not more state programs. It's, let's go find the people in our communities. They're all over the place. Just go find them and ask them, what do you need? Because what do you need to help the people that you're helping already? So it's a model of charity, but it's certainly a Christian model of what Bob calls radical grace. And he has a network around the country of about 2,400 people in organizations. And that's what he's been doing for the last 30 years. So I don't think identity politics helps, because you get this immense amount of white guilt, and then people, white people, let's just be frank about it, painting BLM signs in the middle of their street and then thinking they've done their good. That's all you need to do. And my view is that's really cheap. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are fully prepared to play that game.
Hmm.
But that's not going to solve any problems. Painting a Black Lives Matter sign down Main Street of your town doesn't solve your problem. I mean, this is, by the way, just very quickly, this is deeply theological too. It's the Passover ritual. So the Jews are supposed to paint the blood of the innocent lamb on their lintel so that death passes them by. This is the Passover ceremony.
Yes.
And I'm arguing that every single day in America, vast swaths of Americans practice a Passover ritual. They have to say, I'm for Black Lives Matter. I'm for climate change. These are all the things that you do to indicate your innocence. And then, to use a phrase from the 1960s, and I hope you'll forgive my language, then you get a bunch of sit on your ass white liberals who do nothing. And so I think we need to stop at the Passover ritual. If we're serious about solving problems, calling America systemically racist will do nothing except further empower the state and those people who benefit from it. It's not going to solve problems. We need to find the people who are struggling, find the people who have fixed problems, and help them. So it's a kind of fine-grained charity operation. And you don't need, the Gates Foundation and the Ford Foundation. What we need to do as Americans, every single one of us, if we have any sort of resources, is to find the people in the local community who are doing good, whether it's publicly or not, and say, how can we help? That's the only thing we can do. And the wounds in distrust, it takes a very long time to heal, but they can heal. This is what we must remember. They can heal, but it will take a lot of hard work. And I think every American here, whether they were here before the Civil War or not, whether they were from the North or the South, that's the entry ticket. My father came from Lebanon in the 1890s. We had nothing to do with this. We had 800 years of servitude under Islam, in Lebanon, but we had nothing to do with America. But that doesn't matter. That my past doesn't matter. I'm here in America, and that means every American has to accept where things are. And the legacy of slavery, the distrust, there's stuff that's still there, but we have a moral obligation to do something. And the posturing that identity politics allows everybody to do is the wrong way to proceed.
All right, folks, this is Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host. We just heard from Dr. Joshua Mitchell. Please listen to what that brother just said. Repeat it several times. Share this podcast, share this interview with as many of your friends as possible. He is the author of American Awakening. You can get that book at Encounter Books. Go to your search engine and put in Encounter Books. You can also get it at Amazon.com. Powerful, powerful piece of work. And brother, you also mentioned the Woodson Center. Is that correct?
Yeah, Bob Woodson, in my view, is a national treasure. He's 83 years old. I've been working with him for a couple of years. We stumbled upon each other a few years ago and instantly hit it off. Bob Woodson, if you have resources, if you know people who have resources and want to help in a really constructive way to solve problems, the Woodson Center is just incredible. And they're a charitable organization. Bob travels all over the country. He's still 83 years old. He thinks he's got the answer to addressing the wounds of our country, and I believe this man. And everyone in America should listen to him. He's slightly conservative, right of center, but honestly, he says, look, I'm not interested in political parties. I'm interested in radical pragmatism. I'm interested in finding the people who are actually solving the problems and helping them, full stop, in a discussion. I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. And there are lots of Democrats and Republicans. And what Bob says, if you'll just indulge me, he says, you bring the least among us from all over the country together, black or white, and they have the same stories of triumph, of despair, and they can all talk with one another because they've been through hell and back. And it's just when you move up to 30,000 feet and you make these hypothetical arguments and you racialize them, then it's a great big mess, and it's power politics, and we have to put an end to that.
Wow. Brother, we're going to conclude with that. Thank you so much, brother.
My pleasure, Corbin.